Namaste. Indian mystic Krishnamurti. India has always been a land of spirituality, philosophy, and mysticism. J. Krishnamurti has been a great figure in Indian spirituality in the last century. It is time to reflect back on J. Krishnamurti and see how it helps those living to live better. We have with us to discuss the subject Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, how do you see in retrospect Krishnamurti?
He stands as one of the most interesting spiritual masters of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
He also stands as somebody who, in a modern language, has uh, sort of rejuvenated what traditionally in India was called as Jnana Yoga.
Okay.
And in a rough, crude way, if you want to draw a parallel, you can see cognitive therapies in the Western psychotherapy domain, where through thought and awareness, you use these two levers. You use thought and you use awareness in order to bring change in the rest of the psychological system.
Okay.
So you are not using emotion as a centerpiece of change. You are not using energy like Reiki and pranic healing do. You are not using karma like the behavioral therapy does or karma yoga does. You are essentially using thought and awareness to bring about a change in the system. This is something he did with a very new language of his own, and he was almost obsessed with this idea of break from the past, because there was a, in his opinion at least, there was a high probability of the dead and rigid doctrines of the past engulfing completely what he was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Although he was saying nothing new, what he was talking about was Jnana Yoga, a purest form of Jnana Yoga, which was using only awareness and thought from inside as tools for self-knowing and self-transformation.
Right.
It was the purest form of Jnana Yoga, but he did not use these terms. And therefore, he stands out as one of the very interesting figures in the spiritual world. He is also important because he created a global spiritual movement without using the word spiritual. So he would only talk about looking inside, deeply understanding oneself, developing insight, developing awareness to reach to the final goal of choiceless self-awareness, which was another word for what was classically called enlightenment.
Okay.
So he made all these things global. He made these things interesting. He developed, or rather, I would say, he tried to develop a new language of his own to say the same old things again in a different way. And he created a very good counterpoint to the dependence of the Guru.
Mm-hmm.
The Indian traditional system, and not only Indian system, world over, the entire spiritual world was divided into two parts. One, where you were dependent on a guru, and two, where you were a light unto yourself and you were undertaking the journey without a guru. This
Right.
aspect of the spiritual world, where you took the journey yourself without a guru, that aspect was underplayed for many centuries, and it had almost become an accepted principle that you need a guru. And this
Mm-hmm.
was broken apart by J. Krishnamurti. So I think apart from reinstituting Gyan Yoga, apart from saying the problems of the world have to be solved from inside and not outside, apart from believing in spiritual pluralism, apart from believing in individual goodness and freedom, he also brought in this whole idea of freedom from the past. And this, I think, was very important. I cannot emphasize it enough. This movement of being, this idea of being free from the past, and this word past has many aspects to it. It is to be free from our own past, it is our own emotional memory. Also to be free from gurus of the past, and also to be free from the scriptures of the past. So
Right.
this freedom from the past and thinking everything afresh is what he brought into the picture. And if I have to say uh, what is the central thing he did, I think he instituted two things. One, the goal of choiceless self-awareness, which is another name for enlightenment. And two, freedom from the past, which
Mhm.
means uh, being in the moment, thinking everything out afresh. And if you have to capture it in a phrase, it is Gyan Yoga afresh. This would be the central theme of all that he was saying. The goal of choiceless self-awareness and the path of Gyan Yoga afresh. Although he would not
Right.
like the way I am putting it, he would call it a pathless path. He would not call it
Mhm.
Gyan Yoga and all of that. But we will see as we go into our discussion further how uh, this paranoid obsession, let me not use the word paranoid obsession, but let me say this uh, vigilance to keep the past away has caused the Krishnamurti followers a great deal, because
Mhm.
Krishnamurti never wanted to use language of the past, even if he was saying something which was already said in the past. So he
Mhm.
was saying the same thing in a different way, using a different language. So he would not like when I call him his path, Gyan Yoga, and he would not like when I call his goal of choiceless self-awareness as enlightenment. But
Right.
this is what actually it is, regardless of how he tries to keep it away from tradition.
Mhm. Right. Right. And how did you get in touch with Krishnamurti?
As a young student in the engineering college, I had interest in philosophy and spirituality.
Mhm.
And I had many friends, some of them were crackpots like I was. And one of those
Mhm.
crackpots, my friend, one of my friends, he was deeply interested in Krishnamurti.
Okay.
So it is through him that I got in touch with him. And then I read quite a great deal, tried to, and those were the times when you are just beginning to read. So you are in an or situation, you are not in an end situation. So you are constantly thinking, this is right or that is right.
Mhm.
So you read Krishnamurti one day, you read Osho the other day, you read UG Krishnamurti the third day, and you are in a constant struggle whether this is right or that is right, and what to do yourself, where do you fit in. So
Correct.
that is an inevitable part of every seeker's journey, and that was a part of my journey also. So I went through quite a great deal of the books that were there. Much later, I heard some of his cassettes, but that was much later. And at that point, it led to a lot of a fresh thinking in me, which I think satisfies his goal that people should think
Mhm.
for themselves without believing in any authority. So that
Mhm.
thinking afresh, that did happen in me after I read it. And that took quite some years for me to really get the essence of it and synthesize it and come out with what was there in the center, regardless of how much he would try to cover it up with new words.
Right. See. So I'm just wondering that how we can reflect on Krishnamurti's journey as an individual.
Uh, we can look at it in three ways, three phases of his life.
Mhm.
The phase before the transformation process started, which primarily was with uh, the Theosophical Society, and his being sent away to UK for studies and so on and so forth. So his life as a seeker, as somebody who was getting prepared to be the star of the East or whatever they called it in their language,
Mhm.
that part. Then the transformation process, about which he does not talk about much. So he did have his own calamity, like Freud had his splendid isolation, and Jung had his Nikia, and Osho had his own difficult transformative process. Krishnamurti also had his own. Unfortunately, neither Krishnamurti nor Osho have talked much about it. Osho has talked to some extent, but not very extensively. And
Mhm.
Krishnamurti has talked even less about his own transformative process. Others have
Okay.
written about it, especially those who wrote his biography or, biographies. They have written to some extent about it, but we don't have much extensive write-ups on exactly what happened to him. How did he undergo transformation? Because there is no way an ordinary individual can just emerge as an enlightened individual without undergoing some deep process. It's just not possible. There has to be some deep process, maybe quick, maybe slow, maybe instantaneous, maybe spread out, but there has to be some process through which a normal individual undergoes and emerges out as a very extraordinary individual. So everyone has gone through it. He would have also gone through it. Doesn't talk much about it. That I think is a second phase.
Mhm.
Third phase is his journey as a spiritual master, although he would not call himself spiritual, but a journey, his journey as whatever he would call himself. He may call himself a fellow traveler, a guide. He would definitely not like the word guru, but regardless of what he says, he did become one. So
Mhm.
uh, that phase of his life of going around the world, giving talks and lectures in order to bring about inner change in people, through which alone he felt outer change also could be brought about. So
Right.
quite unlike Karl Marx or Hegel, he was not so much interested in moving from outside in. Like all Indian philosophers and mystics, he essentially wanted to move inside out. And
Mhm.
outside change was possible only by an inside change. So
Right.
for an
Right.
individual as well as for society, his road was inside out, not outside in.
Mhm.
So this was the second part of his life. And the third part was once he became old and after he created Krishnamurti Foundation and everything else. And his own struggles with making practical his teachings in the
Mhm.
Krishnamurti Foundation, in the Rishi Valley School. And as he started growing old and started reducing his engagements. So that was a kind of sunset period of his life. I think the most productive period was the second period, third period rather. So first was pre-transformation, second was transformation, third was post-transformation global journey, which was the best period of his life, and then the sunset period of his life, which also included
Mhm.
organizational difficulties once he started making his teachings practical in the real world, in an organizational form, not on an individual level. So we can look at these four aspects. And the third aspect of the globe hopping Krishnamurti, that was the best aspect of his life, where much of his ideas, his books, all of them came out. Because he did not believe much in the meditative techniques, he did not work much on them. But otherwise, I'm sure if he had some belief, he would have come out with very good meditative techniques which would have helped hundreds of people. But because in principle he did not believe in those things, and that's one of the disadvantage of taking the extreme position of the pathless path. Because once you say it's a pathless path, there can be no tools, no guides, no aids, because there is no fixed path on which acceleration has to be done.
Yeah.
So that is its own.
Can we call it just like an uncreated light?
Yes, yes, yes. Because that is where the difficulty creates. Once you is created, once you talk about a pathless path. And in fact, we realize that the pathless path also is one path. It is not that it is not a path, it is one of the paths.
Yeah.
It is just that it is not a single path, it is a path of freedom. That does not mean it is not a path. It is definitely one of the many paths. So, but if we had openness to accelerating tools, he would have innovated a lot on that front, but he was almost, this word comes again to be almost, I don't want to use the word paranoid, but he was almost hyper vigilance.
Okay.
About being engulfed or contaminated by tradition. Because the moment you talk about tools, a culture like India, where for thousands of years this has been the central preoccupation of the whole society, you would have a basket full of tools. And it would be very difficult to save the new from the past. The past is so large, it would engulf the new. So I think that is one of the areas where he was hyper vigilant, and therefore all that we have are his talks. We don't have meditative techniques, we don't have tools, we don't have anything on holistic healing, we don't have anything on psychological healing. So the entire tool aspect, the process aspect is completely out because of this singular focus and belief in the pathless path.
Right. On the canvas of Indian spirituality, how can Krishnamurti's vision be seen?
We can look at two parts of what his life was all about. One is the goal, and second is the journey towards the goal. Now, the goal has two aspects because the man was concerned both with the individual and the collective. Only that the change in the individual was supposed to be the vehicle for the change in the collectivity. It was not as if he was not interested in collective well-being or social change. Of course, he was interested, but the path was from individual to the collective, and within the individual, it was from inside out, and that created for him the first goal of the choiceless self-awareness. So if you look at Krishnamurti's goal state, the goal state is of choiceless self-awareness. That is not anything new in Indian spirituality. In Indian spirituality, what we used to say was pure awareness or pure observer, or in Sanskrit, what they call the drashta bhav or the drashta sthiti. So it was that is not something new for India. It is just that we use a new vocabulary. Otherwise, the goal state has been a goal state for thousands of years and hundreds of masters. There's nothing new about it.
Yeah.
The second aspect is of the journey. And in the journey, he went for a pathless path. But the pathless path was not completely pathless. In the sense, he would not prescribe milestones, he would not prescribe a process, but when you hear him talk, it's very clear that he is referring to a process of Jnana Yoga. So he is not using energy mechanics of Reiki, pranic healing, or Tai Chi, or acupressure, or acupuncture. He is not using affect. He is not using behavior. What he is using is awareness, thought, understanding, and insight. Essentially, awareness and thought.
Right, right.
He is essentially using in terms of the path. He is using awareness and thought to understand something so deeply, see something so deeply that one is able to exhaust what one is seeing. So what you are seeing, you can exhaust by so profound an understanding. So the mastery or liberation from what you are observing inside is essentially through observation or awareness and a profound understanding of it. And the understanding, when we say profound, is very important. It's not intellectual understanding. When he uses the word profound, it means you keep understanding it to such a depth that the whole effect and everything else which is related to the incident is actually separated. It is only then that you can be free from it or be a master of it.
Right.
Because
Right.
if the affect and the intention in the entity that you're observing inside is stronger than your will or awareness, it is going to overwhelm you. Till that extent, you will have to say, I have intellectually understood, but I have not profoundly understood. This is nothing but using a Jnana Yoga technique to detone all complexes and desires of their affective part.
Right.
So the whole path was of using thought and awareness and understand something so profoundly. By that means keep understanding it intellectually, ethically, and most importantly, to the extent that the affect involved in that entity is completely relieved, catharted out. So it was catharsis by using awareness and thought.
Right.
So that was the kind of approach that he had. When we look at these two approaches, both these approaches are very old approaches. There was nothing new in what he said, just that he was trying to use new language so that he is not captured and digested by Indian tradition. And he knows what a large tradition we have.
Right.
And the difficulty was, as he was trying to create a new language, it became very difficult because what he wanted to say had already been said in tradition using the simple language. Now you don't want to say this is the same thing. You don't want to use the same language. So then you have to manufacture a new language, and he was not very efficient in manufacturing the new language. Krishnamurti had its own limitations with respect to his knowledge in psychology and his knowledge in philosophy. He was not a scholar, he was not an intellectual. He was a very intelligent person, well-read person, but by no stretch of imagination you can classify him as an intellectual. So
Right.
his own limitations came in. And this is where we see the difficulties which he has created for his followers. That what he is saying is not new. He is just packaging it in a new language in order to escape being contaminated by or captured by tradition, which is the right thing to do for him because he's trying to do something afresh, rightly so. But he could not create alternately efficient language, and therefore this repackaging created more confusion than clarity for people. And I have seen hundreds of people wasting years of their lives trying to understand J. Krishnamurti, when in fact there is nothing to be understood with him. What he is trying to say, they already know from tradition. And I have just seen people wasting their lives, and therefore many times I actually have requested them to give up Krishnamurti for a time and go with their own natural language and their own natural journey. Let me give an example. There is a very famous book, The Ending of Time. In that book, J. Krishnamurti is in conversation with a very well-known scientist called David Bohm.
Okay.
And I think he is a physicist, and if I am not wrong, in quantum mechanics or something of that sort. Maybe I am wrong, but this is what I recollect. Anyway, so this conversation between him and David Bohm, the ending of time, when I first read it, it just seems so esoteric and mystical because it gives rise to questions like, are we looking at a different definition of time than what Newton and Einstein have said? Is there something very different inside in terms of time and outside in terms of time? When you pass through the process of enlightenment, is there a new kind of time that you encounter? Are you free from time? What is it all about? All these kind of crazy questions come up. And if you read the book and if you understand, Krishnamurti is talking about psychological time. So he says ending of time. Does that mean the clock will stop time? Of course not. Nobody can stop physical time. So if Krishnamurti and David Bohm are talking from 12 to 2, at 2 o'clock, it's going to be 2 o'clock. Nobody can stop it. So the ending of time, there no person, no individual can end the physical time. So what he means by ending of time is the ending of psychological time. Now, does that mean, so then it comes to what is psychological time? Does it mean that we stop having a notion of time in our heads? Does it mean that there is no psychological future for us or the past for us? What does it mean, the end of psychological time? And what he means by end of psychological time is he relates that to the notion of becoming. That I am at state A and I want to be in state B. I have $100 and I want $1,000. So today I am in state A, I have $100. I want to have $1,000 in a week. That is state B. And this journey from one state to another is called the journey of becoming. That I want to become something that I am not. And this becoming, he says, is psychological time. If this becoming ends, the psychological time ends because I have nothing more to become. Now that is the same as being free from desire. What is the new thing about it?
Right.
So what Gautam Buddha said 5,000 years ago, whatever be the time, 5 or 4 or whatever it was, and what the rishis before him in the Vedic period had talked about more than 15,000 years ago, it's the same thing over and over again. Now you call it the ending of time, then you say it is ending of psychological time, and you say physical time cannot end, then you say psychological time is nothing but the metaphorical description of the process of becoming. And once you end becoming, the psychological time ends because there is nothing else to become, which is the same thing as saying being free from desire, because becoming is nothing but a movement of desire.
Yes.
So this is the way, if somebody takes up the ending of time, he will waste 6 months or 1 year trying to find out what in Indian tradition is available free of cost and very simple to understand. So if you just have to say you have to be free from desire, say it straight. Why do you have to convert it into becoming and psychological time and ending of time? So these are the kind of somersaults, the gymnastics that Krishnamurti gets into because he wants to be free from tradition and create a new language, and he is not efficient in creating the new language.
Right.
And that has to do with his own training.
Mm-hmm.
Freud or Jung had become Krishnamurti, they would have done it much better.
Okay.
Unfortunately, neither he could become Freud nor Freud could become Krishnamurti. So they have their own silos very separate. But this is something where when we put Krishnamurti in the spiritual canvas, we see the goal that he talks about, the process which he talks about are all in the tradition. It is just the language that he brings about, which is a very secular language, a very scientific language, and is nothing but pure Gyan Yoga, which he uses for the central purpose of self-knowing and self-transformation. But he does not want to use these words, because the moment you use these words, you are back into the traditions and you are back into the conundrum, the difficult paradox of solving. Like once you talk of transformation, you are talking of a goal. And once you talk of a goal, if the goal is clear, you will always say there are three methods and one is more efficient than the other. So with a fixed goal, the methods, alternatives, and their relative evaluation in terms of efficiency cannot be escaped. So he would not say transformation is a goal, but that actually was what he was doing at the roots, was self-knowing and self-transformation without using these words. So we see that he is doing exactly what has been done for hundreds of years, just with a different language in a more secular way and focus completely on Gyan Yoga. And also on the individual. I think he never talked about how to take his teachings at a mass scale. Like Osho did. He never created a commune to see if his teachings could be applied in a commune, or what kind of collectivity would his teachings lead to.
Right.
So those were the collective aspects of the society. Was another area that he was not very interested in or also clear about. In terms of what his teachings would lead to. Of course, he was interested in overall good. That's a different aspect. And he saw inner change as a way to outer change. But I was referring how the collectivity would emerge from his teachings. On that part, we don't have much problem.
Correct. By the way, how do his ideas and work stand today?
I think very few people can undertake the journey of self-knowing and self-transformation with this Gyan Yoga approach. It is not something new. This approach always has been approach of a microscopic minority across history. So it is not surprising that very few people actually are comfortable practicing what he said. And there is also a reducing number of people who are reading him, much less than what I used to see in my early days.
Okay.
In my college, I would see out of 100, at least 5 people would have read him in some way or the other. Maybe less, maybe more, but some way. Now I hardly see anybody. In fact, the new generation that I talk to, most of them don't even know who this man was. So if what my experience is a representative sample, I think the reading of him has gone down, and the practice of him anyway will never be a mass phenomenon. It's just too difficult and too unique, not cut out for everybody. So that is second. And the third is the way he put it, on which I have spent considerable time. It is unnecessary creating confusion by inventing new words and concepts to explain something which otherwise can be very simply explained. So I'm not surprised that it is a kind of a dwindling tribe, a reducing tribe. You have centers over the world. You also have people taking interest, but it is not at a scale that you see in Osho or you see in Sadhguru or you see in Ravi Shankar or any of that flavor. In retrospect, however, I think he has reinstituted after a very long time a pure form of Jnana Yoga in the area of self-development and spirituality. And that I think will continue for a considerable period of time because you will always have a microscopic minority who is cut out for this particular path. My only reservation is that we should have somebody now who is able to do what Krishnamurti did without fearing tradition and doing it in a very simple language.
Right.
If that kind of a spiritual master emerges, I think it will serve the core purpose of Jnana Yoga and it will serve people who are cut out for Jnana Yoga much better than what Krishnamurti did. On the positive side, he did bring about a shaking up of people and asking us to look at our conditioning, the hold of memory on us, the hold of habit on us, the slavery of tradition, the slavery of authority, the slavery of the guru, and also the necessity of thinking afresh. So I think this thinking afresh is the key for all that we said. And that theme, thinking afresh, I think that is an eternal theme. It is not a temporal theme because every generation will have to think afresh at some point to remove some of the difficulties of the past baggage. That is a eternal historical phenomenon. And in that sense, in a limited way, the essence of what he said will continue. The language in which he said will not continue.
So, as you mentioned before, choiceless self-awareness was central to Krishnamurti. How do his ideas of compare with ancient Indian traditions?
In ancient India, the goal of enlightenment has been differently described. Choiceless self-awareness or what is called pure drashtabhav. Only the observer remains. There is nothing to observe. So it starts with a split. That you are splitting your mind into two. One part is observing the other part.
Correct.
And slowly the other part falls out. Only the observer remains. The observed goes out. And at some point, Krishnamurti says that even the observer goes out. So at some places he says nothing except the observer remains. And in other places he says the observer is the observed. Now this creates difficulties because you can definitely create an observer. You can also create an observer of the observer in a mental way, but not in an experiential way. Because the observer is self-aware from inside. It is not being observed by somebody else. You can be aware of it from inside, but it is not a ad infinitum situation where you can create a similar hyper observer to the observer. So those are experiential difficulties of what he said. But what he said was this, that the observed will fall away, only the observer will remain, and even the intellectual component and the affective component of the observer will go away. And only the awareness will remain. So the observer initially, which is a intellectual, affective, moral entity, apart from being an awareness entity, out of that, much of the proportions will drop and only pure awareness will remain into the state of choiceless self-awareness.
Right.
Now, the difficulty with choiceless self-awareness is that in the real world, we have no choice but to make moral choices. So you may not have an affective choice, but you will always have a cognitive choice. There is no way living in the world you can escape making cognitive choices. You may not have an affective and moral component in it, but you will always have a cognitive component in it. Similarly, he talks about freedom from the past, freedom from the memory. Nobody can be free from the cognitive memory. So what he says is freedom from the affective and moral memory. It is not the cognitive memory. For example, if you have to be free from cognitive memory, you also have to be free from language. You have to be free from mathematics, all that you have learned. You will be back to junior standard. And nobody can do it. It's beyond the capability of any individual to unlearn completely. Nobody can unlearn completely. You may refuse to use the learning that you have. That's a different thing. When we talk of unlearning, essentially we say we refuse to make use of certain things we have learned. But there is no way you can reverse it the way you can reverse a video cassette. So if you know ABCD, there is no way you can consciously forget it. So when we say unlearning, we only say it is a decision not to blindly use the past. It does not mean we can undo the past. Cognitively, nobody can undo the past. So this being free from the memory also is qualified, just as the choiceless self-awareness also is qualified, just as the observer is the observed is also qualified, just as the psychological time also is qualified, that you may not have personal desires, but you will be escaping the moral responsibility if you don't even have desires for the collectivity. If you see a poor person suffering, you should have a desire that something good should happen to him. Choiceless self-awareness can easily lead to a moral nihilism. And that's not a great thing to happen to anyone. So it's not possible in this world to really have a choiceless self-awareness in a moral sense of the word. So that again is with qualification. So when we look at all that he said, it has to be contextualized and put qualifications too. And with those things, we can then look at his essence and try to put them in our lives or use them for our own spiritual journey, which did not necessarily be a pathless path, what he prescribed. Many people have a journey of a clear path. They are not cut out for a pathless path. For those who are, they can follow what he says. So when we look at all these things, we see much of it already there. In fact, everything of it in the Indian spiritual tradition. There's nothing new about it. It's only the language is new and there is a complete distancing from tradition. But there's nothing new about it. Krishnamurti very easily fits into the Indian spiritual tradition.
So, did Krishnamurti have a comparison vision on human existence?
No, because he was not an intellectual in that sense. So when you look at somebody, some spiritual master, many of them don't have a collective vision. So some like Osho and Sri Aurobindo would have a collective vision and also much to say on the spiritual aspect of life. But many people like Raman Maharshi or Ramakrishna Paramhans, they were not intellectuals, although they were spiritual masters. And therefore, they did not have much understanding or much to say on history, on politics, on economics, on culture, and so on. So Krishnamurti belongs to that group of spiritual masters who are not intellectuals. And therefore, he did not have a very profound reading or a scholarly response or a paradigm of his own with regard to history or philosophy or culture or anything of that sort. So we don't find much of uh, a kind of prescription for the mass scale from Krishnamurti. We only find that he is concerned about the way things are. He feels there should be a change for the good, and the change for the good has to come from inside the individual. And the way is to follow a pathless path to choiceless self-awareness. This is all there was, but how this will create a new collectivity, in the process, how the collectivity will be, when a large number of people reach the goal, what kind of collectivity will it be? If this whole project fails, what collectivity will be? What is his take on history? Does it have any purpose or not? What is his take on philosophy? What is his take on the mystical methods in Indian spirituality? For example, say mantra, use of certain herbal preparations, use of tantric methods, use of meditative methods. All these methods are believed to accelerate your journey towards choiceless self-awareness. They are all accelerators. So he did not believe in them, and I don't think he also had even a deep, profound understanding of them. Because my feeling is that he saw people using these old tools and not getting anything out of it. So he really did not have an encounter with somebody who really knew what it was in its depths. So he never encountered a true teacher of tradition who could give proof of concept of tradition. So he only saw misguided people in blind faith, following tradition blindly. And with that experience, he rejected the whole of it. But of course, it was not correct, because the truthful part of tradition is an accelerator tried and tested over thousands of years. It is not a coffee table knowledge generated by somebody in a span of 20 minutes. It is a tradition of thousands of years tried and tested over and over again. So he did not have any belief in that, because he never encountered somebody who showed positive results out of it. And this also has to do in a very important way to something that deals with all spiritual methods. On this point, I would agree with Krishnamurti, not the way he sees it. He dismisses everything. I don't dismiss everything. But on one point, I agree that all spiritual methods that we have are highly inefficient. We don't really have enough innovation, right, to create efficient spiritual methods, or if they are known secretly by a few people, not by type of people that you and I encounter. Because you go to any spiritual tradition, you go to Osho, you go to Sri Aurobindo, you go to any spiritual tradition, 100 people, if they practice sincerely, hardly 1 to 5 people attend. The success rate always is less than 5%, which means we are dealing with highly inefficient processes. So regardless which school you go to, no school has a success rate of more than 5%. Most schools have a success rate of less than 0.1%.
Right.
99.9% people in most schools, they die without realizing their goal, even after searching for it and working for it for a lifetime.
Correct, correct.
So we are dealing on the whole with highly inefficient spiritual processes, which are very unpredictable and highly inefficient. And therefore, if somebody says a pathless path, he is not leading you to something very inefficient compared to the comparable, because the comparable itself is very inefficient. On this limited point, I would agree with Krishnamurti that at least the type of traditions we know and the type of people that we encounter, we don't have efficient spiritual traditions, and therefore it would not be completely off track to go for a pathless path. So when we look at it from this point of view, Krishnamurti fits into tradition. He creates one more inefficient spiritual path, but he brings something very fresh, which is to always think afresh, be free from authority and memory, and be free from the past and practice. This, I think,
Right.
is something very, very valuable that he sort of again makes active in the Indian spiritual tradition. It was always there, but it had got extinguished. Krishnamurti has made it active again. I would say, to use the phrase, make the obvious vivid. So this was always obvious in the spiritual tradition. He has made it vivid and made it more living.
Right. I'm just thinking, how does Krishnamurti look at psychoanalysis, and how does psychoanalysis look at Krishnamurti?
We did not have a deeper understanding of psychoanalysis. So
Okay.
I don't think you can really give a very considered opinion about it. But what we would say is this, that the psychotherapist or the analyst was becoming a new authority figure. And one has to be free from it, number one. Number two, much of what therapy does is to enable you to adjust to society. It is a back-ended way of making you conform in the name of reality acceptance. So there is a implicit bias towards conforming to the existing society in the name of reality acceptance. Third, it does not talk about the possibility of being free effectively from one's past, which Krishnamurti said was possible. So the limits of human potential that Krishnamurti draws and the limits of human potential that psychoanalysis accepts are different. Krishnamurti that way is very optimistic, considering that he believes full change is possible in terms of being free from memory and conditioning, which had happened in his own case. And because psychoanalysts, including Freud and Jung and everyone, they never had these experiences. So they could never imagine such a state was possible. So they were very pessimistic with regard to what was best possible. Fourth, Krishnamurti's pathless path again was colliding with the frame of psychoanalysis.
Okay.
Because psychoanalysis is not a pathless path, it is a very clear path which is covered by the frame of psychoanalysis. So that also was in collision. The whole concept of guru, which was implicit in the therapist. The therapist was almost becoming the priest or the guru. That also was alien to Krishnamurti. And the goal of choiceless self-awareness that was, according to psychoanalysis, completely non-achievable,
Mhm.
which for Krishnamurti was achievable. So
Right, right.
for Krishnamurti, many of these were collision points that Krishnamurti and psychoanalysis would not look at each other in a congruent way on these points. The only point of confluence was both of them believed in self-knowing and self-transformation as the key to a better life for the individual and for society.
Mhm.
On this point of the center being self-knowing and self-transformation, on this
Mhm.
point, both of them were seen. With
Mhm.
regard to how psychoanalysts look at Krishnamurti, they look at him like they look at most spiritual leaders.
Mhm.
That most of the spiritual leaders uh, want to do away with the hassle of reality by attaining a state, a goal state, which some people call choiceless self-awareness, some people call enlightenment, some people call attaining God, some people call Brahman experience or something. And for them, this is returning back to the breast. That all ideologies, all utopias are essentially a return to the state of what I call the bliss at the breast.
Mhm.
It is return to the state of primary narcissism. So
Right.
for them, any spiritual goal is actually a projection of the early life experience of primary narcissism, where we want to return back and to be in that perpetual state of bliss at the breast without any hassle of reality, which is not possible.
Mhm.
So for them, all ideologies, whether it is Marxism or spirituality, all of them are the same thing, a quest of utopia, and the utopia is a projection of the early state of primary narcissism.
Right,
So
right.
they could, psychoanalysis could neither accept the goal nor the path to the goal.
Mhm.
So there was a complete collision in terms of the goal and path of the goal. The only point of convergence was self-knowing and self-transformation, its significance in a positive way for the individual and for society.
Right, right. So, what would you see as shortcomings in Krishnamurti and his ideas?
Many actually, I think the lack of his uh, being an intellectual is the biggest difficulty. That he was not a scholarly intellectual type of spiritual master. And that means that on all collective issues, be it area of politics, culture, philosophy, sociology, he didn't have much to say. It's
Mhm.
the very big limitation of his entire work and vision. Second, he could not leverage or could not even appreciate that apart from awareness and thought, you can also use action as it is used in karma yoga, or emotion as it is used in psychotherapy or uh, bhav yoga. I forget the name. What do they call it? Bhakti yoga. So he could never appreciate that one can achieve the state of choiceless self-awareness through the path of energy or through the path of emotion or through the path of action. We could only see merit in the Jnana Yoga type of exercise. Third, he could not also understand or appreciate the whole mystical part of Indian tradition, like how mantra can be
Mhm.
used, visualization can be used, idol worship can be used,
Right.
how Reiki or pranic healing can be used. He was completely out of touch with this, or when he was in touch, he did not view them very positively.
Mhm.
And I think much of it had to do with his own experience. He never came across people who were genuinely successful using these paths.
Mhm.
I think if he had such an experience, he would have accepted it. He was a very honest person, very truthful person.
Okay.
So it just happened that he did not come across people with this kind of ability to give a proof of concept.
Right.
Fourth, I think he unnecessarily created a new jargon which is wasting times of hundreds of people in just communicating what was very simply known in tradition, just to keep the tradition away and think afresh. So, and he was not very efficient in generating that vocabulary. So the phrases he uses, the words he uses at different points for the same thing, and the way he tries to communicate what he wants to communicate, I think it's unnecessary repackaging, and that is costing hundreds of people hundreds of hours. It's
Mhm.
completely avoidable. And
Right.
lastly, his approach is for a very small group of people. It is not for masses. It is for a microscopic minority who is cut out for Gyan. So these are some of the uh, very limiting aspects of Krishnamurti. That does not take away his greatness. He did what you and I won't be able to do in 5 lives. That's a different matter altogether. But that granted, that said and accepted, there were and there are severe limitations to the man and his work.
Right. Right. And is era for Krishnamurti's past, and does he also belong to the future?
I think the the aura around him and his teachings is past. I did not live much longer after he passed away. But the core concepts which he talked about, not the method or his language or his books, but the core things that he talked about one, uh, freedom from conditioning, freedom from tradition, freedom from authority, freedom from the guru, uh, freedom of a pathless path, examining deeply, profoundly oneself,
Mhm.
using thought and awareness for self-transformation, and being in a state of choiceless self-awareness and living moment to moment afresh. Those core ideas, I think, will stay in future also, just as they have stayed for thousands of years before Krishnamurti came on the scene. These things are not new. He has said it anew afresh, but those things always have been there. So I see no reason why in future these things should not survive and even prosper.
Right.
But his books, the way he said it, much of it that will fade away as people realize it was done at a particular point in time where it was very necessary to keep the tradition alive.
Mhm.
And once that time is past, and there's no need to keep the tradition away today, we have a much simpler and easy to understand articulation and expression, discourse about what he said in the tradition much better than he said. So his uh,
Right.
core ideas will survive. His uh, books and audio cassettes and the stuff of that, that will not survive. I don't think that will survive
Mhm.
much in future.
Right. And in your ideas on natural cultures, you referred to Vedic spiritual society. Does it have any relation to the way some groups of Krishnamurti followers live?
Yes, because in that write-up that you are referring to, it was called Natural Cultures, and it was on the theme of cultural democracy. where the idea was that we should have not only one format of society based upon the marriage system, but we should have multiple formats of society, and people should choose which format they want to live into. And one should be clear about the strengths and weaknesses of each format, and do's and don'ts of each format, and the interrelationships between each group and the other.
Right.
When we talk, that was the basic idea of the write-up you are referring to. In that write-up, I did talk about the one of the formats of society, which I call the spiritual society. And that spiritual society had many sub-formats. It can be like the commune, it can be like the Osho ashram, Sri Aurobindo ashram, and it can also be like some groups which are living uh, with ideas of J. Krishnamurti at its center. So it does become one specific expression, one specific sub-format within the category of spiritual formats of society. So my feeling is that in future, as multiple cultural formats emerge, the format of a group living together with Krishnamurti's ideas at the center will also be one of the options of many formats available within the broad spiritual format society. I don't expect it to be very large. I don't expect many groups to emerge in this format. But yes, in a limited way, the format will be there, constituted of people who are cut out for Krishnamurti's way.
Right. All right. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. We have discussed today on Krishnamurti. Continuing our series on Indian mystics, we shall have more such discussions in coming episodes. Do watch and write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.